And here the direction of fit is from my words to the world. This may also become clearer when we take a look at the extension of John Searle's speech act theory into a theory of intentionality, that is about a theory about how the mind works. So Searle thinks that the speech acts and the typology also correspond to different states in mind. Yeah? Such that the assertive speech acts correspond to beliefs. Yeah? So our intentional states of beliefs, and performative speech acts correspond to intentions, last but not least, then expressive speech acts, which are basically expressing our states, emotive states, for instance. They refer to emotive states. And as much as, for instance, a performative speech act is characterized by a word to world direction of fit. An intention also is characterized by an intentional state to world kind of direction of fit, where if I have a certain intention to do something, then I change the world according to my intention. And according to Searle, this direction of fit is important to distinguish the different kinds of mental states that make up our philosophy of mind. The emotive states then are special in that they do not have a clear direction of fit, where they are not necessarily about changing the world, and they are not necessarily about reflecting the world. They're rather about expressing oneself. Okay, so speech act theory is a pragmatist kind of way of dealing with speech, and it has been developed by philosophers based on American pragmatism, and yes, has inspired much also of social ontology. And I think it is a little bit underappreciated in empirical sociology. As you may have noticed, it is possible to investigate also the social world by looking at the types of speech acts which are used. So like a discourse analysis of speech acts is something that could be easily done in any kind of sociology relying on text data, or any kind of also empirically realized speech acts. Okay. So these were some of the major, let's say, theoretical contributions of the early American sociology. The Chicago School of Sociology is not necessarily associated with very elaborate theoretical approaches. This is much more the case for the structural functionalism that Talcott Parsons then offers. Chicago sociology is much more known than also for the empirical works that have been done, and I briefly wanted to conclude also this lecture with a couple of examples of these empirical studies. And most notably, there is probably the study of the city, so Park and Burgess developing a model of early urban sociology, and based on the city of Chicago, of how the city is basically a social construct, and how cities also grow. And they develop a theory then of Chicago's growth as a concentrically kind of growing a city in, as you can see here, these different circles, where sort of each layer that is added on top of the city also has a specific social function. So Park and Burgess also follow an evolutionary model then of city growth and city construction, where in a way the competition for urban space leads to a segregation of different spaces, where the segregation can be both functional, in the sense of commercial areas being separated from the residential ones, but also being social. So some of these, for instance, here in the second zone, areas then corresponding to certain ethnic groups or certain races. Here is Little Italy, just the ghetto, or the German neighborhood, for instance. So evolutionary model then translated to urban space. The Chicago School then is also known in the interwar years for the many community studies, and I just listed some of the most important ones. Many of those focus then on what is here called the zone of transition. So let's say, areas in Chicago here in the zone 2, which have been, let's say, the most changing neighborhoods. But among the community studies, you also find very, let's say, elaborate studies, such as the Middletown studies by the two Linds, so husband and wife, publishing together a first volume on Middletown, which is Muncie, in Indiana, a town that up to the current day is known for having among the best predictions of presidential elections, just because it's an average middle-sized town in the United States. And the Linds went to study this town in its very many aspects in 1929 and decided to go back to it in 1937 to study the effects of the Great Depression on the city in its economic life, a lot of chapters also on the home and family life. And one of the major findings at the time was that there was very little everyday kind of impact of the Great Depression. This contrasts very strongly with a similar community study which was conducted in Marienthal in Austria, the unemployed of Marienthal of 1933 by Maria Hoder and Paula Zarsfels, who later on would found also the Columbia School of Survey Sociology, but also conducted community studies of the effects of the Great Depression in two small cities in Austria. And their main finding was to reveal the devastating, also everyday kind of impacts the Great Depression has had on family life, on the psychology also of the unemployed at the time. Community studies have still been trendy in the 1950s, but ever since have not been really a genre pursued by sociologists. It's really a genre associated with the Chicago School. Then also a part of the Chicago School is Jane Addams, who is also one of the co-founders of American sociology. Jane Addams had visited Toynbee Hall in London's East End, which was a kind of settlement movement in Great Britain. So the idea of social reformers living in a neighborhood characterized by social problems in order to do social work. And back in the US, then Jane Addams also used a lot of her private wealth and then also philanthropic money in order to found Hull House in the 1890s. So also a settlement house movement center in order to realize just social work, but also to observe the social order. And this resulted also in the publication of the Hull House maps and papers in the 1890s already. And in a way, it was preempting much of the later Chicago School sociology as well. Jane Addams herself rather abandoned academic sociology, and in World War I, as I already mentioned, became a radical and therefore also ostracized pacifist, was active in the peace movement and in the early New Deal movement in the 1930s. And yeah, won also the Nobel Peace Prize. Emily Balch also won the Nobel Peace Prize, and she's also an instance of an early cultural feminist, so someone who thinks that gender differences are culturally created. Just to give you an impression of the quite modern approach also to mapping used in the Hull House papers published by Jane Addams, where statistical information was already used here to, for instance, display the ethnic composition of a neighborhood in Chicago, dependent then on the data collections in the project. All right, so let's take a step back and think about what kind of theory symbolic interactionism then is epistemologically. It's pretty much following common sense empiricism. So just starting from a basic realism then, and just using the kind of observation techniques also used in everyday kind of life to generate scientific knowledge. We saw also that the explanation type is mainly non-causal and is about interpreting meaning. Yeah? So it is very close then to the understanding tradition of sociology initiated by Max Weber. This also implies a methodological dualism, so the kind of methods to be employed in the social sciences according to symbolic interactionism are different from the ones in the natural sciences, just because because meaning is something distinct for the social sciences. This also implies the main explanandum. So what is to be explained in social interactionism? It's mainly how meaning is created in situational context. And the answer is clearly it's interactions, right, between individual persons and objects, and interactions between individuals which even explain the constitution of personhood itself. The normative status of theories is, let's say, disputed in the Chicago school. Some, such as Jane Addams or George Herbert Mead, saw sociology really as a social reform kind of science, with a clear normative stance also, whereas others like Robert Park rather adhered to value neutrality as a principle. When it comes to ontology, symbolic interactionism brings in also something new, in that it sees situations of social interactions as a building block of social ontologies, and following up on Simmel, it also defends kind of relational sociology, where the meaning, right, of a social entity depends on the meaning of others. And when it comes to anthropology, symbolic interactionism sees human beings as situated just in their social environment. It's critical of ahistoric, universalist, rational choice approaches, as the pragmatist model of action has shown. All right, so we leave it here. Have a great day.